So the bullying allegations in the NFL with the Miami Dolphins have sparked a much larger discussion focusing on a single word. That word and the strong emotional reaction that it invokes are revealing a surprisingly deep division among some in sports locker rooms. The question is, should it be okay to use the N-word, and who gets to decide? Miami Dolphins guard Richie Incognito was suspended indefinitely for conduct, quote, detrimental to the team. He's accused of using the N-word in a voicemail left for teammate Jonathan Martin. Incognito insists he's not a racist. The N-word has now become a problem for basketball pro Matt Barnes. He was fined $25,000 for tweeting the N-word in the middle of a Clippers game Wednesday. Now Barnes is defending his use of the word, saying it's used on the court, used in the locker room, used amongst my friends and family. It's a regular word to me. I think my mistake was using it in a social manner, which I regret, and I apologize for it. But you guys have to get used to it. Charles Barkley defended Barnes, saying, quote, I'm a black man. I use the N-word. I will continue to use the N-word among my black friends and my white friends. Now, former Miami Dolphin Randall Hill says using the N-word is a generational thing.
That generation, you know, they use those type of words, and I'm not agreeing with it. I'm not agreeing with it at all. But you know what? We have to sit back and say, what type of relationship did they actually have with each other? Because what I'm understanding is that type of language was actually going both ways now.
But the N-word debate is drawing more emotional reactions from other former players like Shannon Sharpe.
I hope I'm wrong, and they didn't allow Richie Incognito to say this racially charged word in an open locker room and go unchecked. That's unacceptable. I'm embarrassed for it, because when if he said that to Martin, Jonathan Martin, he didn't only say that, he's talking to you too. Because if you're black, you know what that word means.
Joined by the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation. Reverend, is it a generational thing? Is this the children of the civil rights movement realizing that the history of the N-word as a hateful word to so many African Americans, and the grandchildren just not having that same connection? What is it, and where are you on this?
I think, well, I've clearly been against the use of the N-word.
Period.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you are.
Doesn't matter who you are and what the circumstances. But I think that there is some generational debate, but I think it always was. When I was a kid, Richard Pryor used to use the N-word. This is not a new debate. Right. I think that what we have to look at, though, is we are talking about a locker room, which is part of the workplace. And no matter what generation you are in, does someone at the workplace have the right to use racial language? You have to remember now, the locker room is not owned by the players, it's owned by the team, who in many cases are subsidized by taxpayers, municipal bonds. Sure. So you're telling me that I have the right to say, I'm just a big kid, I can do that at the workplace? Well, it's locker room talk. Well, if you're in this building, is it cubicle talk, to use a homophobic term?
We would get suspended or fired.
So that's what I'm saying. Can we make allowances without opening ourselves up to, well, now we can use homophobic terms or sexist terms? Either there's a standard that includes blacks, or it's no standards at all, and that's the problem with this.
Sometimes when we get into this debate about the use of the N-word, the first thing that some people will bring up is entertainment and music. You brought up Richard Pryor. That's a absolutely. Right. And he was doing it for the shock value. Right. In many ways, sort of, and sometimes you use it for a shock value to remind people of it in a negative light. The Jackie Robinson movie is a classic example of using it, I would call it historically appropriate, in order to remind people what life was like then. But do you look at the entertainment industry and say, you know what? Where are you on the use of sort of pop culturizing the word?
No, I've been against it. I mean, I've had endless debates with some of my friends in hip hop, some of them younger than me, saying I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it in lyrics. We've had friends that fell out with me about it. But I just do not agree with it. And the hypocrisy of it is they know better than to do that to other groups. They only do it with the N-word. If they really believed it was free speech, then why are they so careful not to offend others? But they can use this with us. And if the N-word is not the denigrating term for blacks, then what is it, I ask them? If it's not the N-word, tell me what. There's no word that's offensive to us, but there's words for everybody else. Come on, I think they're taking a cheap way out.
Well, let's talk about this NBA player, Matt Barnes, who essentially made no apology. He said, I'm going to keep using it. That's how I talk to my friends. what would you say to him?
I would say to him that if he wants to keep using it, fine. But if he does it in a municipal stadium, in a locker room, he should be fired. If he does it in any other workplace site, he should be fired, just like anyone would for a sexist or homophobic term. There has to be standards that protect everybody, including blacks in this country.
Do you worry that it gives a permission slip? I mean, look at Richie Incognito. He felt like, I think one of his defenses, he didn't say it this way, it was almost as if he felt there was a permission slip.
Yeah, I think
he had to use it.
I think the danger, though, not only do I think that it's dangerous to give a permission slip, I think the danger is that we know who not to offend. So it's really biased to say it was all right to offend blacks. And like I said, if the N-word is not the word, then what's the word? Can we be the only ones, Chuck, in this country that you can say anything you want about us, but you can't do it about others? I'm not willing to live under those standards.
When you see this debate that's going on in the sports world, do you think there needs to be more Shannon Sharpe speaking up? Are you been surprised at how this is a lot of younger African Americans who grew up in a different time, you know, have no memory of the civil rights movement, weren't raised, even being raised right after it in the 70s, like I was. You sort of have one memory of it. Raised in the 90s, a whole different mindset. Do they need? Is this an education campaign? What needs?
I think they need a somewhat of an education and sensitivity campaign, but I also think that a lot of them are conveniently. Because, no, they were not in the time of the 60s. I mean, I was a kid in the 60s. But they're in the time of Trayvon Martin. They're in the time of a lot of issues today. They're in the time of the Supreme Court dealing now with affirmative action. So they shouldn't just clean their hands of any involvement. They know who to call when they have a problem, when they're profiled.
Right.
So I don't know that I accept that they're as oblivious to this as they try to pretend.
All right, Reverend Al Sharpton, I got to leave it there. But I thought it was important to get your take on this, and you bring in some perspective, particularly this generational thing, because that's what strikes me. All right, you can watch the Reverend Al, of course, on Politics Nation every night at 6 p.m. He won't always have people I went to high school with in Randall Thrill Hill. He went to my high school right after I was there. I wasn't as good of a football player as Thrill Hill. Anyway, don't miss the Reverend's special examination of gun violence in American cities. 50 years of guns. That's this Friday at 9 p.m. on MSNBC. It's part of our special coverage of the anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. All right, up next, it's MSNBC week here on Monday at the Daily Run. Now I got Joe Scarborough here to talk about his book. But first, White House Soup of the Day, 15 Bean, Legume Day. You're also looking at new pictures that are coming into MSNBC right now as daylight comes up in Washington, Illinois. Just a horrible, horrible devastation there from those tornadoes that swept through that state.